Solar PV Cast by Shift, a podcast exploring solar energy and the role it plays in improving our lives and our planet. Here's your host, Chris Palliser.
Agrivoltaics. Ever since I read about agrivoltaics a couple years ago, I have been so excited at the prospect of maximizing every single square foot of a piece of land to generate electricity and help with agriculture. It makes a lot of sense. That's what we're talking about in this episode. It is the Solar PV Cast. My name is Chris Palliser. It is brought to you by Shift. For all your solar and energy storage needs, make sure to visit shift.ca. Joining the podcast today to talk about agrivoltaics and a great pilot program that happened that they did and the future of it and what they're trying to do to move this industry forward is Jason Bradley, CEO of Sun Cycle Farms. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here, and it's great to look outside the window and see the sun shining down, which means that plants could be growing and solar could be being produced.
There it is. So give us a little background, first off, yourself, and I know you're one of the founders of Sun Cycle Farms, so kind of how you ended up into Sun Cycle Farms.
Yeah, I always say that I have a non-linear career path. So I started out in high tech in a Canadian-based company that at one point was the fourth largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. At the height of the dot-com bubble, before it burst, I decided to go and follow a lifelong passion to manage a large cattle ranch. So I left that company, and at the time, it didn't seem to make any sense to my colleagues and even to me why I would leave the blue mothership. But I had this in my DNA, this desire to go and to continue to be connected to cattle production and to creation. So I went to manage a 50,000 cow-calf operation.
I'm picturing Yellowstone right now.
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and I think there's a lot of similarities, but I don't know that I've ever taken anybody out behind the train station or whatever that.
Oh yeah, to the train station, yeah.
Yes, right. But no, I spent 19 years in the back of a horse with grizzly bears, cougars, wolves, and wild horses and cattle, and it was quite something. And but at the end of that 3 years, what I realized was that I wasn't looking at cattle production on the ranch as a system. And so I got looking into soil health and trying to understand how to use the cattle and the grazing more in a systematic approach, and realized that there was an opportunity to create a regenerative agriculture system. And so I designed and built an adaptive multi-paddock grazing system and a gravity-fed water system. And I put all that together with a group of yearling grass cattle. And over 3 years, I realized a 300% increase in forage utilization and production. So at the end of that was the end of my time at the ranch, but it kind of spurred me on to go do some different things. And I ended up going to teach at an agricultural college, and they asked me to stay there and help to stand up a smart farm and a smart ag ecosystem, because I had this ag background and tech background. So I did that, Chris, for 4 years and helped Olds College get the Olds College Smart Farm up and going. Now I spent a little bit of time in ag tech at a startup that was using a nuclear-based technology to measure soil carbon, which was very cool. And then 2 years ago, started to realize I wanted to help people create regenerative agriculture systems of their own. And so I started working as a regenerative agriculture consultant. And then about a year into that, I met my co-founders, and they wanted to learn more about regenerative agriculture, and were asking me over a breakfast meeting, well, how would that apply to solar? So what was supposed to be an hour over breakfast was a 3-hour in-depth meeting. And the guys just really were picking up what I was laying down, and ended up very soon after that, we said, we actually need to address this as a need and create a company out of that.
Incredible. What a resume. And that is agrivoltaics, agriculture and tech, or in this case, solar PV.
Yeah. And it really, the more I spend time in it, I don't know if it'll ever change, but it seems like every time I think about it, it makes more sense. Like it never makes less sense. So
right. Yeah.
Just the whole idea of that synergy that happens between renewable energy production and agricultural production. It just, and I guess if you've changed your mindset enough to allow that thinking to happen sort of outside the box, then you can start to realize much more of the possibilities of why it makes sense.
Yeah. It seems like you have a real mind for making the most out of everything. Whatever energy was needed to create that thing, it's, the grass is growing. How can we make this more efficient? How can we do this? And so my eyes around my thoughts on agrivoltaics is just that, it's the condensation off the panels, giving nutrients to the grass. It's the shade, which is helping things grow. And I guess that's kind of what you're working on at Sun Cycle. Cycle, maybe this was on purpose, maybe not, but kind of, I'm guessing it was on purpose, the cycle of life, right? The fitting it in the cycle.
Well, it's a circular economy. Like if you really want to get sort of philosophical, while at the same time quite practical, creating true circular economies means that you have to look at all parts of a natural ecosystem and a financial ecosystem. And those things all have to be blended together. So yeah, that was intentional in that what we're really working at is designing circular economies where all these things work together in certain types of a natural ecosystem, but also designing and enabling bio-mimicry to happen. And so when you do all those things, then you can be much closer to whatever a circular economy is.
Now, I've never heard bio-mimicry before, but I'm going to take a shot in the dark here. It sounds like we're trying to mimic what Mother Nature is already doing. And, we're just trying to mimic that cycle of life that exists. And rather than us coming in and just making it work for us, because that's what we do, we're now trying to work within it or mimic it. Am I close?
Yeah, you are. But let's think about that for a minute. So I'm going to back up a little bit, and you said something about trying to make something the most out of everything. And a big focus of what we do at Sun Cycle Farms and with our clients and those we work with is, first of all, looking at soil health, because that's where all of our health comes from as humans, is from how healthy the soil is, and then how healthy the plants are and the animals are that are integrated with that, then how healthy the food is from that. So it's soil health, plant health, animal health, human health, one health. And so always trying to stay on that sort of common ground or that place where we can all agree that that's important. Like we can't ever take that for granted, and we can't continue to extract value out of that. We have to always add value to it. And so back to the thing about biomimicry, when I think about soil health, there's a framework that I use to do all of my work. It's trademarked and coined by the folks at Understanding Ag, and it's the 634 framework, which is the 6 principles of soil health, the 3 rules of adapted stewardship, and the 4 ecosystem processes. And so all of our agrivoltaic design focuses on the 634. And when you think about things like, well, we need to protect the soil from, direct sunlight hitting it, because that's actually not healthy at all. It's the reason why weeds exist. God created weeds because the soil is actually trying to protect itself, right? It doesn't want bare ground. So weeds are really good at establishing in those places of bare ground. But what are they doing? Well, they're creating protection and armor for the soil. Well, what do solar panels do when we put them on the land? They actually provide armoring or a protection to the soil. So that's true biomimicry, where those solar panels are providing some shade from direct sunlight. Many of the forage plants that we use are not actually meant to have full sunlight all the time. Up to 50% of those are getting 30 to 50% more direct sunlight than what they need. So
right.
Biomimicry in solar that's one example of. Another one is, you mentioned it a minute ago, you said condensation, but think about evapotranspiration. So if you ever lay down on a thick lawn on a hot day, or even if you've been on a farm or ranch and you've been out in a lush green pasture,
your back's wet.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that evapotranspiration from that lush green biomass is actually underneath solar panels, is creating cooling to the solar panels, which makes them more efficient. So these are things now that we're designing into our systems. I mean, they're happening somewhat, without it being so intentional. And we're trying to understand that better and be much more intentional at making those things as part of the system design.
Incredible. Yeah, is there any more? I mean, I've never looked at. I've just been like, I read an article that sheep are happier, and that's cool for me. Um, and in terms of, but the mimicry, I see what you're saying. It's like we're gonna mimic the weeds in
Here's
this
another one.
case. Okay,
Here's another one. So
yeah, I like it.
the trampling action of animal hoofs on the ground is really important to get that transfer of biology from above ground to below ground. If you think about, 200 years ago, maybe a little bit less, there was somewhere in the order of 90 million bison roaming across the North American plains. But they were in groups of tens to hundreds of thousands in a herd, being kept together by all kinds of predators around the periphery. But their hoof action on the ground, not just the grazing of the grass, the biting of it that caused it to have the right response, but all that manure, urine, saliva, hair coat, and the hoof action, when you think about it, actually puts that biology in contact with the soil. So one thing we're working at in solar is planting the forage crops that we want before construction starts, and then allowing, as construction happens, the equipment that's going back and forth across the land is actually a form of biomimicry. It's mechanical trampling, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it's actually creating, the contact of some of that plant matter to the soil where the biology needs to access that to thrive in the soil.
Right.
So there's another example of biomimicry that we can't just let that be, accidental. We need to plan that and be very purposeful about it.
How are you finding the uptake to these ideas? Because like you said, this all makes incredible sense. And when you lay it out like that, I'm just like, yes, this is amazing. What's the uptake like in your conversations with people? Are they like, well, is there a cost to this, or do they understand the value?
So yes and no. So yes, they're asking questions like, is there a cost to this? And do they always understand the value? No. And that comes from partly because we all live in our own bubbles, our own paradigms, right? And so some of the things I'm talking about in agrivoltaics are very disruptive ideas, even within agriculture, just on its own. So the whole idea of a nature-based system and using regenerative agriculture principles can be very disruptive to the paradigm that lots of us live in agriculture. And so when I bring these things forward, whether it's a regulatory situation where we're helping a client get to the regulatory approval, or with other landowners that maybe aren't in favor of solar, it's quite easy for them just to hear these things and say, well, those are nice theories, or I'm not sure that you can prove that, or they just don't want to move out of the paradigm that they're in. And that's fine, because I guess that's their own prerogative. And so it is difficult sometimes to actually sort of move beyond those paradigms of, well, we've always grown plants this way. Or, I think not too long ago, solar farms were designed in such a way that, vegetation management was maybe sometimes nothing on the ground, because you don't want to have the risk of, fire or shading.
Right.
Where we're trying to get people to move well beyond that and think about what are the benefits of collaborating between agriculture and energy. So yeah, I think there's a challenge there that we get stuck in our paradigms.
Yeah. Now you're based out of Calgary. Obviously, Alberta had a moratorium on large solar projects for a time. Are you finding more success in other parts of the country, or are you just focusing on the business on Alberta right now?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of reach outs from different parts of the country and into the US and beyond. But it kind of happens to be a good situation for us being located in Alberta and in Calgary with that moratorium coming off. The whole industry is trying to sort of figure out, well, what does that mean? What do the new regulations mean? Are the new regulations even really well defined? And because Alberta is a deregulated market when it comes to energy production, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but there's also a lot of, I would say, lack of clarity right now. And so we're trying to actually help define that, even to the point where I had a direct reach out from the Minister of Affordability and Utilities and had a one-on-one meeting with him because he wanted me to help him understand some of the different methodologies that we're recommending for being able to measure the threshold of agricultural production and the agricultural impact. And so it's kind of an interesting space to be in right now because our company seems to be helping to inform and provide some clarity to going forward to like agricultural impact assessments to solar project approvals.
One thing that we do talk a lot about on the solar PV cast and in the whole world of solar is education. And it's so important. That's the whole reason I started this podcast, was just to kind of simplify solar because it can be intimidating. And we're going against, honestly, the marketing of fossil fuel companies for 100 years. And so everyone has this idea stuck in their head that new is a little bit, scary. Solar's not reliable. Well, we've solved that problem, and in this case, it's kind of like, well, if you put solar in my field, what else can I use it for? Well, we're solving that problem. Like, no matter how many problems we seem to solve, there's still a bit of an uphill battle in the conversation.
But I think there had better be, right? We had better be good at accepting healthy impedance from those around us and being able, right? And new things because they're new. We're not used to it. And so change is uncomfortable, but that's why it's good.
Yeah.
And so I try and remind myself often that there's going to be either reticence or pushback because these are new ideas and some things haven't been done well in the past. Well, farming, some forms of primary agriculture production haven't been done well. Some forms of solar PV haven't been done well.
Totally.
And so I think that I think it's fair for some people to be like, well, I don't trust you yet, or I haven't, or I've seen the opposite of that, and I can't deny that sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think
that's fair.
I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to show, well, here's why this can work, which is why our company has also decided the need to be able to show and educate that. So you talked about education. And so we've reached an agreement with the town of Cardston, and they've provided us access to 14 acres of land for a agrivoltaics demonstration farm. So we can show and teach like real life scenarios of how this can work. Because a lot of what I know intuitively and intellectually and academically can work, I still haven't proved that in all the different areas realistically.
Yeah.
So I can make nice PowerPoint, decks that show what could happen, but there's a little bit of Jerry Maguire in all of us. Like, show me the money, Jerry.
Yeah.
Show me how this actually works.
Yeah. And you're bang on. You're right. I think the industry's going where it's going because of that pushback. You're bang on that we have to kind of level up, take the high road, do all the right things, check the boxes for sure. You spoke about this project. This is the one I think I was reading about with the cows, kind of September, October. You guys did that. How's that working out?
Well, it was a really good learning experience in that, first of all, I knew that cattle can effectively graze in existing solar. Like, of course, it's always going to be easier if things are originally designed to accept certain things. And obviously, if solar panels and racking were higher and farther apart, it'd be easier to integrate cattle into there. But I knew it could be done. I spent, a third of my entire career managing cattle and doing a lot of it within using an electric fence. And that kind of electric fence is actually mimicking what predators do to keep cattle bunched up.
There it is, bio-mimicry.
Right. And so I know how that works. And so my partners, who happen to also have the ability to give us access to the Sunrise farm right adjacent to our demonstration farm, said, well, let's put the cattle in the Sunrise facility because we need to be able to demonstrate that. And so it worked out really well. And it was not a full scale. It wasn't like 100 head that we put in there, but I was able to demonstrate clearly how we could integrate cattle grazing into existing solar. And knowing that, I was nervous. Like, I spent the first night in the hotel thinking, oh, what if I get down there tomorrow morning and those cows have gotten out and they've rubbed on everything? But they didn't, because they were already trained to electric fence. And so they understood that infrastructure. And we were able to prove not only how they could graze within there during like active season, late season grazing, but we also we're able to feed hay on the ground and let them bale graze in the winter in the same situation. And they benefited from getting in under the solar panels from the wind and wind chill, just like they would in the summer from heat. And then we were also able to do a drone seeding project across that whole facility because there was a lot of exposed soil. So we flew a drone over and drone seeded a polycrop. And then those cattle were able to use hoof action, manure, urine, saliva, like I talked about, and get that seed to soil contact in a non-germinating time of the year, so that this spring, we're hoping that a lot of that seed is going to be able to establish and grow some good forage in there as well.
Beauty. So this kind of pilot project, it's not 1 year we get to try it and then we've got to move on. It's kind of yours to continue to show people.
Yeah, so we can go, like the cattle aren't in there right now.
Okay.
One of the struggles we had was livestock water in the winter. We didn't have that set up well ahead of time. And so we can go back in next year and reintegrate cattle into that same facility, try different grazing approaches, different numbers of cattle. I'd really like to run a flurd in there. So a flock of sheep and a herd of cattle is a flurd.
Okay.
They have a lot of complementary grazing practices. They graze plants differently, but they can work really well together. So I'd like to put some sheep with cattle in there and continue to improve the soil health and grow a healthy, nutrient dense animal protein at the same time.
Silly question coming from me. Do cows like to run? I can't picture cows running in a field. And I just thought, well, if they're in this field, do they have at least a spot where they can do 100-meter dashes?
Yeah. So can cows act like cows?
Can cows? Yeah.
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 The range cattle, like out when cattle are, out in open range where I was, there are times when they run because they're under threat from predators and they're what we would call flighty. A lot of other cattle, they have a social behavior. Well, they're a herd animal, first of all, right? So they have safety when there's lots of them together. And so they do at sometimes like to move out, but most cattle don't have a propensity to just go about and run.
Right.
But I do get asked the question often, well, can they exhibit their, normal social behavior? And the answer is yes. It's not quite the same, but it's possible.
Right. Totally off-topic question, just because I grew up always being told that when you see a field of cows lying down, it means it's going to rain. Do you have any thought on that before we get back to solar?
No, cows lie down because they want to ruminate, right? They have a 4-part stomach. And so after cattle graze on grass, they actually regurgitate that and they chew their cud. And so when cows want to ruminate, they lie down. And so I don't know that has anything to do with rain coming or not.
I think it was like my mom told me as a kid that her dad used to always say, anyways, passed down family thing. I thought, hey, I'm going to solve this one right now.
It could be, but I've never noticed that, but I'm not going to say it's not true.
There we go. Yeah. And the other thing that got me into agrivoltaics was you touched on sheep. Sheep are happier. And this article did discuss condensation, lambs giving birth under there. So I'm excited to hear about these kind of two worlds working together. Do they eat different things then? And like, do the sheep, would they be able to go under and maybe the cows can get to spots cows can't fit?
Yeah. So first of all, sheep and cattle, they graze differently, but they'll also select for different plants. So here's an example. Lots of times sheep will select for leafy spurge where cattle just won't, right? So that can be helpful if that's an invasive plant that you're trying to address. So they do often graze different things, but they also benefit from having some of the same forages like legumes and grasses that are highly nutrient dense. Mm-hmm. And then they also, to your point, like sheep can almost always pass underneath the panels.
Right.
So if you were to put a group of cattle and sheep together, you'd have to figure out how much forage is available for that area. Let's just use an acre. Mm-hmm. For a number, and you'd figure out how much dry matter is available. You do a measurement. And then you could create a 1 acre paddock. I'm drawing it out here, but you could create a 1 acre paddock that and you would put the amount of cattle and sheep in there that for the amount of time they were in there, that there would be enough forage available.
Mm-hmm.
The cattle, you would restrict them to, in between the panels so they couldn't touch and rub. But the sheep, you'd let them go, around that whole 1 acre paddock, for instance. And then through observation and careful management and adapting what you're doing, you would watch that sometimes a few times a day to make sure that the animals are safe and they're getting access to all the forage they need, but also to make sure that there isn't overgrazing happening and you're not causing, negative effects to the plants and the soil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something else, maybe I'm just thinking of my shopping cart at the grocery store. It said, if this shopping cart goes over the red line, the wheels will stop. That could be something for cows or these animals as well. How to put an ankle brace on them and they can't cross the line.
Well, so that's an amazing connection you just made, because we're working with a global livestock company, Gallagher, who have a long history of providing electric fencing products for livestock.
Okay.
In the last few years, they've developed what they call their eShepherd collar. So it's a virtual grazing collar, just like lots of people have seen it for dogs, where you have a virtual fence in your yard.
Yeah.
Similar, but it uses a polygon, like a shape that's created through a GPS signal.
Okay.
That defines a boundary, and then the collar goes on their neck. The collar is actually a solar panel.
Oh,
right?
come on.
At the bottom of the collar is a 2-sided device that has small solar panels on each side of it. But it works in such a way that when the cattle, and they get trained to this, you have to train them ahead of time, but when they start approaching the boundary, they get an audible. And they've learned that if they go past the audible, they get electric notifications, like electric fence. And so we've been talking with Gallagher a number of times, and we're working with Olds College, my former colleagues, to acquire 30 of these devices for our demonstration farm to see, is the resolution of that boundary, is it finite enough for us to be able to move cattle within solar panels effectively?
Right.
Because that would be a great advance, because then you can create your grazing paddocks virtually based on the edges of the panels.
Totally.
And then the cattle learn how to move within that. And so these are the kind of things we're working on at our demonstration farm. But we want those very much and very soon to be commercially applicable, because they've got to get out there into these existing or new utility scale solar facilities.
Mm-hmm. Again, working within the parameters kind of Mother Nature, but also finding the success. Can you speak a bit about the win-win-win-win-win to agrivoltaics? Because, the owner of the farm is winning because they don't have to get in there with a lawnmower, gas-powered lawnmower, and take care of the weeds. Can you speak a bit about the win-win-win?
Yeah, well, let me back up a little bit. So if I'm the landowner, let's just use that as a use case. So let's say I'm a landowner that's leased my land to a solar asset company. So right away, there's a win, because I'm getting an annual per acre payment that is never going to be the same as what I get paid for in Canada, barley or canola or wheat or flax or any of those things. Like, it's just not. So there's a win right there. If I think about it,
coming in every month. That's it. Yeah.
Right. So that's a guaranteed, that's a profit, right?
Yeah.
That's net margin every year on that acre. But if that same landowner also happens to be the agrivoltaics operator, so they're not doing just vegetation management, as you talked about. So they're not just mowing to keep plants down from shading and fire risk, but they're doing true agrivoltaics, where they're using, maybe mowing, but mostly using sheep or cattle or other livestock to graze that forage. Then they can, create highly valuable, highly nutrient dense animal protein, but they're going to get paid to do that because the solar asset owner has to pay somebody to either mow or spray.
Right.
So why not have the landowner, if they're so inclined, to do that? And so this is the thing that excites me as a recovering cattle rancher is, you either have to pay to, you have a debt payment on land that you borrowed money from the bank to pay on an annual basis for that acre, or you lease land from your neighbors, but it's a cost for grazing. But as an agrivoltaics, operator, grazer, you get paid to manage that vegetation rather than having to rent grass or pay principal and interest payment on money you borrowed. So it completely flips that. So that's a win.
Yeah.
If you're working really with the focus of soil health as the common ground or the basis that you're starting from, the agrivoltaics operator, the asset owner, the O&M in terms of the facility, if you're really truly focused on soil health, you're also going to be advancing the nutrient density of the food, but that soil is going to get better year over year rather than be degraded, which can happen outside of solar. It can happen it is happening in conventional agriculture. We're degrading our soil because of the way that we're farming it. So if you use a regenerative agrivoltaics approach, you can improve the soil health and make that asset more valuable at the end of the project life of solar. So there's a lot of wins right there that it's hard for me to understand why it doesn't make sense for some folks because
and
of that.
And of course, the animals are winning. They're getting that nutritious condensation grass, and they're getting the chance to roam, and apparently they're happier. And the insects, I did a whole podcast on the insects around solar farms and how it's like 300 times more biodiversity for insects around a solar farm than the field next to it. And I'll send you this episode. It was with the Argonne National Laboratory in the United States, one of their researchers. And what do a whole bunch of insects in this solar farm do for the fields around it? Pollination, and the crops do better around it.
So one of our founding partners, Dan Toker, is passionate about the whole pollinator aspect of this. So on some of our projects, we're actually planting pollinator species of cover crops, like multi-species, where we're ahead of time putting in areas where it attracts pollinators, or we're working with beekeepers, apiaries to bring their bees in. So we want to enhance the habitat and biodiversity for beneficial insects, whether it's introduced like bees or a managed livestock, or whether it's the natural insects and attracting that. But what that also does, it starts to attract all kinds of different birds. And then once you start attracting different birds, then there's other predators and other animals that come in, and
we're in a cycle. We're in another cycle.
And so this is one thing that I continue to work on with my clients is how do we increase biodiversity in solar rather than just trying to eliminate all that that's going on, thinking that we're just helping to improve the ongoing O&M cost of the facility.
What's the one big roadblock that you face in growing Sun Cycle, and is it a cost thing? I mean, solar PV's come way down, but it's the question that a lot of people still get. Would you say that's it? We touched on it a little earlier, but if you could narrow it down.
Yeah. I think the biggest hurdle is lack of understanding or education, as you pointed out before, of what the potential is with agrivoltaics within solar. And I think it's that, and it can look like a number of different things. It can look like regulations that seem onerous. It can look like lobby efforts of other sectors that are like conventional farming might see it as a threat to land being available. The conventional fossil fuel folks might see it as a threat to their business model. So but I think a lot of that comes from lack of understanding or education, where they haven't been able to see yet the value of a real agrivoltaic system. And
you touched on regulations a couple of times. I won't take up too much more of your time here. We're having a great conversation. I appreciate it. This is Jason Bradley from CEO of Sun Cycle Farms, talking about agrivoltaics and what they're doing in the space. Regulations touched on a few times. Is Alberta specifically, that's where you're located, is there regulations, a lot of hoops to jump through for this, or is it fairly Wild West energy?
Well, no, there's a lot of regulations for sure. Currently working with a client to help them through the Alberta Utilities Commission approval process on a project where the agricultural impact assessment as part of a regulation is still kind of being defined. there was the moratorium that you mentioned, and out of that came, as part of Rule 007, there was some more amendments that were made to that regulation. And so we're helping that client respond to what the agriculture impact is and what the benefits are of true regenerative agrivoltaics, as opposed to the perception that it's just taking ag land out of production.
Mm-hmm.
So the jury's out a little bit. I guess what I'm concerned about is that the regulations have changed and are changing, and the goalposts are getting moved.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes don't even know where the goalposts are. So
yeah, totally.
And that's coming from a lot of different areas. So it's a little bit, I would say frustrating, but maybe we need a few more years under this new current regime and regulation to understand, well, what is it that we are really being asked to do to make sure that we can get approvals and ongoing monitoring.
Clarity industry-wide for sure. I know even municipalities have their own version of rules for residential solar. And so there's a lot of, you need that kind of streamline across the country almost. Bouncing around a little bit, but I just had one thought. I'm picturing this. I had a chat with a gentleman about solar carports. And one thing that they're really excited about in their solar carports was the ability to collect water and not waste it. Is that something you've taken into account with your systems? You know, when the rain comes down on those panels and it's running off, where does it go?
Yeah. We've done some thinking about, is there, at large scale, is there ways to harvest water off of the solar panels? So mechanically, there probably is. And Matthew from our team has been looking into this. But I think there's a better way, which is, if you're improving the aggregation of your soil, in other words, if you're increasing the efficiency of the carbon cycle, taking more atmospheric carbon, and because you have a lot of healthy plants and you're integrating livestock, you improve the efficiency of taking atmospheric carbon and sequestering it in the soil. When you do that, you actually create soil aggregation. You create more carbon in the soil, which then allows the water cycle in the soil, so that every drop of rain that falls, even if it's off of a panel and somewhere else, you capture it where it falls. So better soil aggregation means that water can move up and down through the soil profile better, but it can also move in a transverse fashion better. So I would actually rather improve my soil aggregation and let that water in the water cycle, as one of the 4 ecosystem processes, move across the soil and up and down in the soil more effectively, rather than trying to spend too much time being worried about capturing water off the edge of a solar panel.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, I guess it comes off the solar panel. Maybe there's like a little thing catches it and sends it back under the solar panel so that it's not creating like an umbrella. I'm sure you've thought of all of this.
I've seen on a fixed access solar farm in north central Alberta, where the forage growing underneath the panel. So these are panels. So we're in the northern hemisphere, and so they're always facing south. The forage underneath those panels was more lush, more dense. The soil was more moist. It had better counts of worms and other nematodes in the soil directly underneath the panels, where you would think, oh well, it's undergoing a lot of rain shading and sun shading. The problem was the grasses and legumes that were out where it was exposed were less dense. They were less green. There was less moisture out there. And I'm like, well, this is another reason why there's a benefit to solar. We have a client that said, at the end of life of this solar project, I don't want the solar panels removed because they're providing me so much benefit to the way that I'm able to farm my land that I don't want them removed.
Right. There you go. Incredible. End of life quickly. What's the end of life? I mean, I know solar panel can still generate 30 plus years. And that's what has confused me in Alberta when people say, what's going to happen when it shuts down? I'm like, well, just put new panels on it. What's the end of life plan, I guess, with sun cycle projects?
Well, and that depends on the solar asset owner, right? So, yeah, we're far enough along, as I'm understanding the maturity of solar itself, that there's projects already that are thinking about, repowering, like putting new panels in with higher efficiency. And so I happen to think that at the end of life of some of these projects that were thought to be 25 years, that could maybe double to 50. Totally. And I think as long as the rest of the infrastructure still remains healthy, that you could continue to repower those. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know it's as much any longer as a hard and fast. At 25 years, we're going to take out all the panels and the racking and reclaim all the land. I happen to think that there'll be much more continuity to that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've taken up a lot of your time, Jason. Quickly, the future of Sun Cycle Farms. Where do you guys want to go? Where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself? More installs. What does it look like to you?
Well, we're doing more work these days on projects that are not yet fully designed. So, a lot of what we've been doing so far is existing, sort of retrofitting what we're doing into existing, which can work, but it's not the best way. So we see ourselves working more with solar asset owners, developers, designing these projects out of the gate so that they're more conducive to full regenerative agrivoltaics. We also see ourselves providing a full suite of services. So on the design side, and then agrivoltaics operation, but also the O&M of the power plant itself, because that needs to happen like this, right? So if you have a large, like the Traverse Solar Project in Alberta is Canada's largest, it's 3,300 acres. There's many different sections of that, and there's oftentimes when they can shut a whole section down, but still be producing, the power that they need to generate on the system. But that coordination between the O&M and the agrivoltaics operator has to be like this. Mm-hmm. So we want to be able to have more contracts where we're doing both the O&M and the agrivoltaics. And if we've done the design up front, then we kind of have that full suite of capability from design to operation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. I have many more questions, but if someone listening or watching this has questions as well, what's the best way for them to kind of get in touch with Sun Cycle Farms and inquire if they want?
Yeah, well, always just go to our website, suncyclefarms.com, and they can connect through email. On the website, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find there.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah. So I think either one of those ways for sure is probably the best way to get in contact with us.
Wonderful. Jason, thank you so much for your time on the Solar PV Cast today. Jason Bradley, CEO of Sun Cycle Farms in Alberta, doing incredible things with regenerative agrivoltaics. And I think that I'm taking away 100% a lot from what you said today. You're incredibly knowledgeable, but the cycle all begins with the soil.
Yeah,
that's what's coming home with me tonight when I look at my garden for the spring. So, Jason, thank you so much for taking your time today.
Well, thanks for the discussion. It was great.
The Solar PV Cast by Shift with Chris Palliser. To begin your solar journey, visit shift.ca.